Nothing wrong
Yes,
with that.
sir. Yeah, just trying to couple last
Yeah.
minute things.
I've been watching the progress on all the lures and whatnot. Seems like everything's coming along great. So you painting the other day, and now you got the eyes and the I guess I'm gonna probably say the wrong word, but like the body panels on them. Is that how you would say that?
Yeah, yeah, it's like the foil. It's basically a vinyl holographic foil that gets cut out and gets applied on there. So it's kind of the eyes and the coloring in one
Yeah.
shot.
No, everything looks great, and then I see you got the flag. All right. Now we're cooking with
Yeah,
fire. I like it. I dig it.
new
I love
addition.
it. How's Long Island this time of year?
It's good. It's warming up. We had, I think it was in the 50s today. It's been really nice lately. The water's super clear in
Mm,
the bay, and fish are starting to move around. And we're out east, so it's so everything comes up
right.
from the west. So it's we're the last ones to
Yeah.
get it on the
Yeah,
island.
it's been pretty cool. Like here in Narragansett Bay, I was down by the water today working on some boats, and man, the water is so clear this time of year. I wish it would just stay that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's super. It's so nice. And then you look at it later in the
Ugh,
season, you're like,
gross. Yeah, it's all brown and muddy.
not so great.
Yeah, and then occasionally get those like a good flush if there's like a nice big tide, like after a spring or neap tide, and all of a sudden you get this nice
Yep,
clear
yep.
water. But so you guys are already getting stripers now?
Some people are catching them
Mm,
up west, closer to like much closer to
okay,
the city. They're the Hudson biomass is
right.
coming out, and all they start moving in, and then people on the North Shore, I believe the fish are there, and there's a lot of holdover fish
Hmm.
now too, more than we've had in the past. I think there's a couple creeks up in the Peconic Bay that have full size bunker that overwintered.
Really?
Um, yeah, like super weird. Like
Hmm.
they're big fish and big bait certainly. And then once the bass get up in there, it'll be go
Yeah, no
time for
kidding.
sure.
Those bunker, if they've been growing all winter, they're probably as big as the bass then when they're coming up.
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah, yeah. Like the large shad
Yeah.
size, like
No kidding. It's like a
big
mackerel
boys.
coming at you. That's too
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
too funny. That's awesome. So, I'm glad to be able to chat with you. We talked a little bit earlier on in terms of like what you got going on,
yeah,
but for you to come on and be like, you know what? I'm tired of finance, right? Because that's your
yeah,
background,
yeah,
right? And you started in finance, but you had this
yeah,
whole love for the ocean, deep down inside, and now we're chasing that. So, like, what brought us together to talk today? So were you always growing up fishing and surfing and just being out on the water?
yeah. Absolutely. I grew up fishing as a
Hmm.
kid with my dad. My dad was a typical like surf fisherman. Kind of chunk of bunker kind of guy. And I was always running around on the backside, on the
Uh-huh.
bay side, stomping around in the marsh and just covering water
Hmm.
basically. So we had two very different styles, but kind of made it work. And and then I started fishing on my own. Obviously went through high school, got a car, and I came out east for
Okay.
college. So I've kind of been out here all my life, like on the weekends and through fishing, and then met a bunch of friends through college and uh, ended up staying out here. And all through that time, I was always around the water. I was surfing and bodyboarding, surfing, swimming around, when it was nice out. And yeah, that was basically it.
Not a bad way to
I,
grow
I
up.
spent a lot of time in high school.
Not a bad way to
What's
grow
that?
up.
Yeah, yeah, it was awesome. We lived much closer to the city, and then I kind of moved. We moved a little bit further east for high school, and then I moved all the way
Right.
east for college. So I kind of hopscotch my way to where I want to be, and it's been awesome. Yeah, it's I originally started building very very simple surf plugs in high school in
Hmm.
wood shop. We were part of a like a surf fishing club, and we would have meetings and typical kind of stuff. And I saw a couple guys there that had like a little lathe, and they were doing their thing in the garage, and I was like, that was pretty cool. And then I had to make a project for wood shop, and I was like, oh, I don't really feel like making
A
like a
cup or right.
tissue
Yeah,
box
something
or a
dumb.
yeah, like so I convinced the shop teacher to let me turn plugs on the lathe. and spent basically that whole amount of time in
Mhm.
that class filling a milk crate up with poppers, and then just shot them with just regular Krylon spray paint, and ended up selling a few here and there to friends, and like just giving them, like just seeing what would
Yeah.
happen. And those are that was back in the mid 90s, where bass were kind of getting hard to come by, but the bluefish were everywhere and they were huge. So we did pretty well with that back then.
That's awesome. So you're able to not only sell the plugs, make them yourself, but at the same time go and use them and catch a few fish on this, all at once. Not a bad shop class. That's a pretty good result, for where most guys are making, a stool or a clean like a Kleenex box, like you said. But you know, I guess it's funny because growing up fishing with my dad, right? I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. It's and actually I went fishing with my mom quite a bit, and growing up
Yep.
it was just a thing you did, and then when my uncle would come in from California, we would go fishing with him, and everyone had their own styles, like you said. Like you were more probably
Hmm.
run and gun, the fast-paced stuff, because
Yep.
that's what you want to do when you're younger. I mean, even to this day, like
Yeah.
Albies come in, oh, running and gunning all day. That's awesome, right? I bring my dad on the boat
Oh
and he
yeah.
likes it, but like he wants to stay put, He likes bottom
Yeah.
fishing. Throw me a piece of bait, slap that thing on a hook, and then just go sit there and see what happens, right? Um
Yep.
so growing up, like with your dad fishing, I mean, that had to have been a pretty influential, in terms of like I guess your ocean experience, if you want to put it in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he started me with it, but it was really like my whole family, because he was a big he worked for the telephone
Mhm.
company his whole life, so he was working a lot. But always kind of made time and had the weekends off for the most part. But whenever he was not, whenever he was at work, and it was either summer vacation or whatever, my aunt and uncle would pick me up and drop me off somewhere. My mom would drop me off
Mhm.
somewhere. I would go with a bunch of buddies and have one of their parents drop us off, and we kind of were all over the place, just getting rides here and there. And then we lived. I went to high school in a town called Wantagh, which is in Nassau County, so it's a little bit closer to the city, but it's still very suburban, and it's right by Jones Beach. So we would ride our bikes. We had like the milk crate on the back with the rod holders and everything, and looked like crazy people. And we were basically headed south towards the beach, as all the at the same time, as around 3 o'clock in the morning, when all the bars were closing. So it was a real odd mix of people on the road at that time of morning, walking around, going to the train station to go home. But we would go down and fish. There were 3 bridges on the way down to the beach, and we would fish the heck out of all those bridges, and then get back home at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and do it all over again the next day. So it was really cool. And my every summer my grandparents would come up. Typical grandparents live in Florida and come up for the summer. And what they would do is they would go back like 3 weeks to a month before I had to go back to school. I would road trip back down to Florida with them, and then I had a bike down there and a bunch of rods that I've shipped down over the years, and they were right in like Fort Myers, Sanibel area, and I would do the same thing down there. Like they would drop me off, or I would go out on party boats, and or fish Pine Island Sound in the backside of Pine Island. And that was really cool, because you got different species
Mhm.
obviously and different styles and different. So that's what kind of brought me into like seeing different styles of fishing, and seeing if like, oh well, they fish this way down in Florida, and this kind of fish is really similar behavior to this kind of fish up north. Like what if you did that there, and kind of like blended. And that's what I'm trying to do now, is like this kind of like bringing something that's not super typical here yet up to like kind of make everybody aware of it, and make it a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so cool that, you're kinda taking all these experiences and, in the back of your head, you've been turning lures since you were young, right? Like this was
Yep.
a thing way back in the day, and now it's kinda resurfacing, which is really cool. I mean, that's kinda, and it's all being done in your garage right now, right? So, it's kinda that
Yeah.
classic, um startup, right? And it's in your garage.
Just got
You
to
got
do
a
it.
heater in the corner there I can see, and it's like, that's awesome. So you eventually you went to where'd you go to school?
I went to Southampton College for
Okay,
college.
and then I'm assuming you studied finance because that was then your job,
Yeah, it was like general business
right?
degree. Yeah.
Right. And then now, you decided that you were going to go through finance. And, tell me about that transition there because now, you graduate college, you go into your job, but then, this whole COVID thing comes, right? And now it's like, all right, you and I spoke earlier and, you're doing this full time, right? And that it's a very
Yep.
interesting
Yes, sir.
time we're living in, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
never, no one has ever experienced it. My parents, your parents, our parents, like everyone's just gotten thrown into this weird thing that we call COVID and the coronavirus. But, I think it's you doing this is really a testament. And it's funny because I've talked to several people that have started businesses in amongst this era, right? And
Yep. Yep.
for a lot of people, they probably looked at you and said, "Well, what the hell are you doing? Like, can't you see there's a pandemic?" Right? But for us, it's like, well, if you look a little bit past that, right, and you kind of peel back the curtain, right now the outdoor industry is exploding, right?
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's really the best time to start what you're starting. So, like, walk
Yeah.
us through, like, how did you what brought you to saying, you know what, I'm going to start a lure company?
Well, I guess like you mentioned college and what I graduated with, and I originally went there for marine biology.
Oh, no way.
So I was in the marine biology and oceanography program, which was huge in that school, and started going through the steps for that program, and then super into it. I was literally I grew up reading the encyclopedia of fish like at night, like just like that was my thing. Like I made topographic maps for school projects and cut out cardboard and made all the reliefs and everything, and so that's what I wanted to do. And I went there and I was very into the program, and I was about a year in and I transferred in. I went to a different
Mhm.
school closer to my house and then transferred in. So I was already 2 years along. And then saw some of my friends graduate and they loved their degree, they loved what they did, but they were going to volunteer at the aquarium, the local aquarium, and then working like an office job or waiting tables in the summer because it's a resort community or that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh geez, like that's a hard go, man. Like I would love to do that, but is that really what you want to do long term? Like maybe I could still always volunteer at the aquarium, but also transition to something else and make a little bit better of a living and but still have and that would give me the ability to do that stuff as well. So I kind of made the decision to switch my major into a general business with a concentration in entrepreneurship. So it's kind of ironic now,
Mhm.
but since this is what I'm doing, but so then right out of college, I worked for a local bank and then a few different local businesses where I was basically, I started just paying the bills and doing those kind of positions and then worked my way all the way up to like a controller position, like a financial. So it wasn't typical like finance ish stuff like the typical financial management, but it was more business management and just making sure that those businesses were on track to make money and survive and do all that
Mhm.
stuff. And just prior to COVID, I switched positions to a smaller company that was a little bit more of a risk, I guess, because it was a smaller company. And that company was, doing okay through COVID, but they made the decision like, look, it's a hard go right now. Like it's not a fun time for anybody. And I was basically the last guy in, so I was the first guy out kind of situation. And I've talked to a ton of people that's happened to, like you said, and it's and my wife was like, look, why don't like you've been talking about this thing for the last 8 years, like and I have been. I've kind of been whittling away or drawing things out or in the back of my head always saying like I had this spreadsheet going on a thumb drive that I would pull out every once in a while and run the because I did cost accounting too. So it was like, all right, what could I make these for? Like how much time do I think I would have? How many would I have to make for a year to make this a thing? Because I think that's what happens to a lot of lure builders, and they're super talented people, and they get into it for all the right reasons, but then they're like, holy hell, like I'm working a full-time job and I have to make how many of these things to make it really worth it? Like,
Right.
and worth it is kind of it's a personal thing. What's worth it
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, worth it, like, and to me, it's not obviously this is what I do now, so it's got to work. Like I have to make a living, but like we said on the phone, like it's I'm not. This isn't a business that it's not like I'm selling T-shirts online where you can scale it and just every dollar you put on a social media, it's $2 back, and it's a formula, and it's that. Like this is a hand built thing, and it'll always be a hand built thing. Like I've made some small little investments in like a better saw and a better this and a quicker this, but it still comes down to hand built, and I think that's awesome. Is that's a major barrier to entry for a big company coming in and just wiping all the small guys out.
Right.
And I think that's really cool. Is that there is such a market for them, and if they're well made and there's the story's right and they're being done for the right reason, and like I think every person that's ever thrown a fishing lure out there, they've had it come back like without doing anything. Like you have to impart all the action you have to do. So that's why this took so long for me, is that I want to be able to have something that's really good, but absolutely bomb proof for the most part. And it's like dummy proof, basically. Like
Mm.
that's what charter captains refer to. Like they just want a lure that you can throw out there and somebody can reel straight back and it'll do its thing. That's why metal lip Danny plugs are so popular, and things like that. And they're awesome, but there are so many people that do those really, really well that that's not a game I wanted to get into, because there are really talented builders out there, and you can pull up on Instagram and just look at a few accounts and you're like, oh yeah, these guys know what it's a classic style.
Mm-hmm.
And like we've talked about, like what we're doing, it's just it's a little different.
Yeah, well, I love how you kind of. I mean, this was 8 years in the making, right? Even longer than that, because you really
Yeah,
started, when you were in high school. So,
yeah.
but you took the time to really want to do it right. It wasn't just, I'm going to throw this thing together and I got to make this work. It's like, no, I want to do this right. And you're, watching you go about it, and hearing our conversation, from the previous time, and now talking to you now, that really rings true. It's like, you got to be genuine. You got to be authentic. It's like, as
Yep.
if it's like if you weren't a fisherman, if you didn't grow up fishing, but then you wanted to start a lure company,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
I've always thought to myself, like, I don't know if I want to be a captain my entire life, but I got to have something to do with the water, right? I got to do something.
Mhm.
Otherwise, this whole podcast is a big sham. It's funny. Like someone the other day was like, I my hand was covered in bottom paint because I had a nice little oops at the boatyard the other day, and
Fun.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. But he's like, what's on your hand? I go, it's all bottom paint. I was working on some boats today. He goes, oh, so like you're actually a captain? And I go, yeah. This, like, you think I do this full time? Like, and I kind of laughed. I was like, man, I hope people understand, like, I'm actually like full time working as a boat captain, and like that's my job.
Yeah,
Um, but to the same, adages like you, it's like, you love fishing, right? This is something that,
absolutely.
and it goes far beyond the actual catching of the fish, right? We all know that. Like, it's not just
Hmm.
reeling a fish and like, oh yeah, this is like what I like doing. It's like, no, it's the process of going the night before and getting bait, and figuring it out, like what the tide's going to do, the current. But at the same time, I think what's cool about lures is that there's this whole like collectors type mentality with them. It's
Yeah,
almost like, oh, you have this artist, because that's what they kind of are, is like
yeah.
art. They're artists at some degree. But like, people can name them out. Like, I'm sure you just mentioned some guy that makes lures, and it's kind of like collecting art. And I know that when I was on the big island of Hawaii, um the Captain Bill, he's laying out all his lures like
Hmm.
on the seat, right? And or the fighting chair, I should say. And he's like showing me, he's like picking it up, and he's like, he's an older guy, so he's like kind of shaking it at me like, this lure, I caught my 1,000-pound Kona Grander on this, and like telling me the story about that moment encapsulated into this lure, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And then all of a sudden, a couple guys walk by, and every person that walks by, they're like picking out a lure. They're like, "Oh, that's a so and so, setup you got there." And he's like, "Well, I got two more at home, and I can't even fish this one because I don't want to lose it, right?" So,
yeah.
it's kind of cool how lures they have that allurement, no pun intended, to like to this collector type mentality. Like there's a history with every single one of them, and I know
Yep.
that, from just listening to you, like you get that. And that's kind of cool when you're going in, but not you can appreciate what you're doing from all levels. What do you think that's kind of important in what you're doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a handmade thing, and each one is a little different, but they're all built to do the same thing. So you have to come up with all these processes to kind of keep them as uniform as you can with something that you're hand sanding. So you have a ton of templates and you have all this stuff. And when you start looking, like you mentioned, two really important things. Like there is that collector side of things, and things that aren't mass marketed. The supply's low. Like there are some brands, like if you look at like the big stick bait, saltwater stick bait brands, a lot of them come out of like Japan, and there are a couple guys here in the States that started making them here because they couldn't get the Japanese ones. And if you try to get them, there's this brand called Carpenter, and they're known around the world. Like they're known to the guys in Australia that are big on it, but they're $300 each. And you go through, like I've researched a lot of these smaller builders, and there's just something about like a person it doesn't, like, I'm into anything as long as the person's passionate about it, and they have like this, they want to be the best at it. I could watch somebody make a pair of boots or a watch and be super pumped on it, even if I'm not a watch guy or a boot guy. It's the process, and the I've always been a process driven person, and it's it's just a cool thing. That, and also that kind of, like, I'm not like a soapbox guy, so I'm not going to do that whole deal, but they're made out of wood.
Go ahead, go on your soapbox.
Well, I think like it's a personal decision, right? Like when I started designing these things, and I was carving them out of wood, and then I think there's even still a photo up on my Instagram about with a couple silicone molds, and I was starting to make molds and make the wiring harnesses to start making them out of resin, like so many other people do. Because if you think about it, that's the not easy. I don't want to say easy because it's not. That's the most repeatable. More easily repeatable. Is that's a thing you could say. But you think about it, you carve the master, then you pour a mold, and that's the same. It's the same every time you pour it out of the mold. You pour the resin in, it hardens, you pull it out, and then you go through the whole finishing process. So, but when you build them out of wood, you're going through that design, almost like design process every time. And if you drill a hole too far to the left, or if the hook hanger is too far to the right, or it, it's firewood, like it's not, I'm not going to put that out there.
just just burn it. We don't need it
Yeah,
anymore.
just take it outside and bonfire it. And,
Love it.
and, through this whole process, like I have this, I put this here for this purpose, like this whole box of just different bodies that I tried, and different designs and different angles. And I sanded this one a little too much. I didn't like that. Okay, this is the one I'm going to go with, and like I said, I started making molds, and I was like, oh man, my friends were asking me like, what are you doing? What are you doing out there in the garage? Like you have a mask on, you're pouring things, like we don't get it. And I was like, well, and every time I told the story, they're like, oh, that's cool. They're made out of, like, you're making them out of wood because they saw the wood carving. And I was like, no, and I hated telling that story, man. Like it wasn't a story. And again, that's me personally. I'm not talking about, like, I don't want to get in like an internet. I don't need the internet to, like, you know, be experts about it. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I like the feel of what I think. I personally think it fishes a little better. Um, and it's just I couldn't tell that story. I just didn't like the whole plastic story, especially with what's going on in the oceans and islands of garbage and plastic that never go away. And you are going to break these things off. Like they are going to get broken off. Um, and I didn't want to. I personally didn't want to put that out there. That's how I'll put it.
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. It's like there's something to be said about the have making something completely from hand in its own element, and wood is something that's been, well, shit, it's a building material that's been used forever, right? One of the
Yep.
first building materials ever. So it's like there's something special about that. And same to you, like not knocking plastic or epoxy or whatever you want to
Yeah.
say, like, obviously there's a pitfalls of, yeah, it definitely goes into the ocean and could create for some, pollution problems. But I personally, I use, epoxy, the epoxy jigs
Yep.
from Hoagie. Those are kind of like my favorite ones right now.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it's all a personal preference, but I think what you're doing is, you're really not only crafting a story, which, like you said, is
Hmm.
super, super important. I think that's much more easily done in something that's handmade, handcrafted, right? Because you're putting your time, your sweat, and I'm sure some blood into every single lure, and
Yep.
it's just cool to see. So what does your process look like? Like, because from my perspective, I'm actually, funny enough, I'm having a conversation tomorrow night with Ralph Crafty of Crafty One Customs, and he's a pretty well known rod builder here in Rhode Island,
Oh,
and
cool.
he had to kind of walk me through, like, how the hell do you make a rod, right? Like, I have
Yeah.
no idea, and so to the same extent, like, how do you make a lure? I am so in the dark on this, other than the fact of just our brief conversations. But you start with a piece of wood, and then all of a sudden you can tie it to a line and throw it at a fish, right? So
Hmm.
what does that process look like?
Yeah. I mean, once you have your body designed and you have the like I spent the last few weeks messing around with different placement of different weights, so it gives different center of gravity. So it either is gonna like I want that thing to you be able to cast it out. It's gonna float. You're gonna reel it. It's gonna sink and do its thing and swim, and then you stop and it pops back up. So it's a lot of trial and error on the design side, but process wise, I just again because I'm a process guy, I listed it out, and I think it was 33 steps it was a lot of steps, like and it's a lot of steps. And you start with the blank, you cut the blank out on a bandsaw or however you cut it out. And I mean, there are guys making plugs with a handsaw. It's just a jigsaw or whatever. But the most efficient way is like bandsaw it out, and then you start with you have to drill, you have to through drill it. So you drill all the way through. So you start from either end and then connect the two. You have to drill for the swivel for the hook hanger. You have to drill for any weight you have, and then it's kind of then that part's over. Then I final shape it. So I do the sanding because kind of I want to have if I'm the easiest thing to mess up is the drilling because they're not going to line up. Like I said before, if you have that one hole over a little too far, so you have to build jigs to standardize your process if you're not making a one-off thing, and then you sand it. So if I blow something and it doesn't line up or anything, I just toss it like we said before. So I don't have a lot of time into it. So then it's basically after you sand it and it looks like that. Like it looks just like a bait that doesn't have anything. It just has a bunch of holes in it. And then you dip it in whatever sealer because you through drilled it, so you want it to be. You're going to epoxy the outside, but you want the inside to be armor proof too. So it's spar urethane, like a lot of surf plug builders use. And then that dries overnight, and then you start your wiring process, and everything influences it. Like the way I have the weight centered, it's involved with the wire, and the wire it has to all go together before you epoxy it. Like there are some guys that have
Okay.
baits, and like I just don't have enough room. There's not enough room here in the bait, like there in the bait, to tuck a weight up and not have it touch other things. And it's only 5.5 inches long, so it's on the smaller side. There's not too much meat there. So then, you put your grommets in, you put your through wire in, swivels in, you tail wrap it, so you have the nice loop on the you have a nice loop on the tail here. And so this is the one I was just testing, and this is the final product here. And then it's ready for this isn't finished, but then it's
I
ready
love the
for
look of it though.
yeah, it's like this is basically the same body as this guy. This is just epoxy finished, just to get that process down. And then this one is the good one with the weight in the right place and all that stuff.
Yeah, I love the look. It's like so my family has this beach house in
Mhm.
Matunic, Rhode Island, and there's a shed in the back, right? We call it like the barn, and it's nowhere near a barn, but on the side of it, like this is how old this is, right? There's a separate little, it looks like an outhouse
Mm.
because back in the 20s that's exactly what it was. So my grandfather, my great grandfather bought it, like
Mhm.
he did some additions to it and he built the outhouse, and now it's an outdoor shower. So like every time we go take a shower, it's in the old outhouse. But like that's how old this place is. And the stuff on the mantle hasn't left in probably 70 years,
Wow,
right? So like
that's
the
awesome.
same stuff my great grandfather put there is like still there, right?
Hmm.
My grandmother refuses to remove anything. um but my point is, like, we go into the barn and you look in the rafters and there's like lures stuck, in the wood, like hanging
Cool.
down. There's like old rods shoved up there. And I'm sure, if you take a peek up in the attic, like you're just gonna find so much random shit that like
Yeah.
it put it in a museum, right? But when you just showed me that lure, like that's exactly where my mind went, you
Hmm.
know? It's like that old school, that classic look, that just like that fat body that tapers down and
Yep.
has that one single hook and then the treble hook on the front. Like
Hmm.
that's such a classic look. And I think pays so much attention to kind of looking back in the past,
Yep.
and encapsulating the 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 look of your brand, but just more so like that old school grit of, going
Yeah.
to the shore, throwing the lure out. Like, maybe it's not a whole day of fishing. Maybe you're planning before work, or, you get done with work and you go right to the beach and use some
Hmm.
shore fishing, or you hop in your boat and you go catch albies or a striper. Like it, I think it really kind of has that old school vibe. And tell me if I'm wrong, because I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, you know, that's the vibe that I'm getting. And even Fight Lure Co., like your logo behind you,
Yeah.
I don't, that look like that's a mean looking decal on the back of a truck right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
But
Thank you.
it's like this old school look, and talking with you before, that's kind of what you were going for. But why do you think, like, why were you so destined to do that rather than kind of continue on with the trends of, flashy, bright colors, really, really like fine-tuned painting? Like, you know what I mean by that? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
this it's not like just a simple, like the simplicity in the lure, I think, is what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah. And I think, thank you. I think that like you want to make things like simple, like elegant is simple, right? Like you hear computer coders talk about it like that, and I used to do the same thing with like writing. This is like super like whatever, but like writing like Excel formulas. Like I wanted to do
I
this.
knew you were gonna say that. Like you're one of those guys that loves Excel,
Yo,
huh? Like
100%. Yeah, yeah.
see, I when I figure something out in Excel, I'm like, man, that's so cool. I have no idea how I did that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Like
like
I couldn't do it again. Like
couldn't do it again. But yeah, no, go on. I just, it's funny you said that because I had a feeling you were gonna go with the Excel. But
yeah,
yeah, keep going,
because you
keep
could do
going.
something that's you could do write a formula that's this long or that long, and it does the same thing. And it's like, well, you want to get it there. And also, like I like again with my background, like my background in fishing and my background in business, like I grew up fishing Gibbs poppers and the old school, little necks, and I have super, I like you said, like memories. Like I pulled a lure out the other day. It was a 1 3/4 ounce or 1.5 ounce Gibbs popper that's all chewed up and it has hook rash all over the bottom, and I fished the hell out of that thing. And I remember being on the backside of Breezy Point in Rockaway, waist deep in water, and a 30 something inch bass just cruising after that thing. And it's so like embedded in my mind, the swirl behind the plug, and if, you know, and it's a simple plug, like it's a simple lure, right? It's bigger than the sum of its parts. It's not a block of wood and a wire anymore. It's something that a fish thinks is alive, and you're imparting the action in it, or it has the action inherent in it, which is even better in my mind. And I just think like the simpler the better, and the more direct connection with the fish, like through wired, it's fully through wired with heavy wire. Like I want these things to be I want to be able to the guy to take them and throw them at a bass, and then go offshore and throw them at a tuna. Like there's no like, maybe change the hooks out because you need a stronger hook, but they're built for that. Like, and I think that lends it, and also something that you're not going to be afraid of just destroying. Like, right? Like I want people to use these. Like they're not going to be $100 a piece. But I want people to use them, and I just think, and also like from my other side of my background, for the business side, like how can I make these predictably good and replicatable to where every single one, while it has that hand built feeling, every single person is still going to get something that's super quality. Like if I wouldn't do it, like I'll stop doing it if I can't do that. Like if I'm not, that's why it's taken me so long to actually do this, because I wanted everything to be right. Like I wouldn't want anyone to, I wouldn't even want to give them away if they weren't right. Forget about charge something for them. So
Yeah. No, I think that's super. I mean, I'm the same way, right? It's like,
yeah.
if if you're not doing something to the best of your ability, then why even put it out there?
Hmm.
And not to say that it has to be perfect, because
You get
I
trapped in
think that's
that.
what happens when people get trapped in,
Yep.
analysis paralysis, and it's
Yep.
like, has to be perfect, has to be perfect. Well, it's like, no, it has to evolve, right?
Hmm.
And through its evolution, you will then find your version or your perspective on perfection, right? But what I love about your lures is that, yes, like, you want them to be replicable, right? Like, you want to have that same vibe. Like, you want to be able to catch a fish on your lure,
Hmm.
right? That's the end
Yep.
goal, right? So, but what's really cool is that handmade element really provides a lot of character
Hmm.
to not only the brand but the actual experience of what you're doing.
Yep.
And I feel as though, in a world where everything is so disposable,
Yeah.
and so, just everything's machine made, and not things don't have as much character as they used to,
Hmm.
it seems like. And I think a lot of the brands that I've spoken with, that they understand that, right? Like, and they're doing something similar to you, like Jetty, right?
Yep.
They're not just an apparel brand. Like, they have a lot of character into what they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
um so I love when you mentioned, like, the simplicity in the lure, because I think what that warrants is, allows the user to kind of create their own experience with said lure,
Hmm.
right? Because it is so, in its simplicity, you don't want to. It's not just something that's like, oh shit, I lost a lure. Okay,
Yeah.
Although, like, that's part of the game,
Yeah.
right? But with that lure that you picked up, and you kind of looked at, like, there were memories made on that,
Hmm.
and you can see the, what'd you call it, hook
Yep.
rash?
Yeah. Yeah. On the belly. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see the hook rash, right? You're not going to get that on a machine epoxy, right?
Yeah.
Epoxy based lure, right? So I think that's kind of cool. It's this, although it's simple, it warrants so much more, and like you said, it's like that Excel sheet. You want it to be as easy to understand and still get the job done, and that's exactly what you're doing. So how much of it is, through this process, kind of figuring out, developing the character of not only the lure, but it's kind of this reincarnation of you, and like,
Yeah.
what this whole process is kind of meant to you personally. Because I don't know about, I mean, it seems like there's a big connection there between the reasons behind why you got into it, and then the actual lure themselves.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's funny. Like you mentioned analysis paralysis, and I'm I'm a perfectionist, and that's you kind of get trapped in that a lot. And through this whole process, like even years ago, like when I was trying to figure out like should I even do this? Like I don't know, like what is it going to be? Like you find all the reasons why you can't do something. And it's funny, like I never did that in at any other point. Like my wife knows me as a very driven person. Like I've never I was like we've talked about weightlifting. Like I was a CrossFitter and a weightlifter for a long time, and I took some time off, and I was never a runner. I hated running, and I was like, I want to do this ultra
You and me
marathon.
both.
And there was a 70K here that was a local race, and I found a coach. I trained for it, and we did it. And like I never came up with all the reasons why I shouldn't do something like that, but I did for this, and it was such a odd thing. And when when I recently had the time to finally do it, it was the first thing that popped into my head immediately. I was like, and my wife was like, "You need to do this. You have." And I'm more of like the things happen and things happen, and she's more of the type of person that's like things happen for a reason, and I'm kind of in between. I'm not one or the other, but and I was like, yeah, I think I need to do this. It's been part of me for so long that I've never like addressed. Like I've never given it enough energy to actually become like alive. Like, and I think it's a living thing now, and it's something that I'm driven to do, and I don't know. I just think it's cool. Like I like it's not for anything. Like I think it's just a cool thing to do, and I think there's a lot of I have a ton of respect for hand built things and the process that people go through, and it does change you. Like it's you're designing something, and all those you start smashing through walls of like, oh man, like why isn't this thing swimming? Like it should be swimming. Everything about it says it looks like a fish. It should be, and but the weight's in the wrong place, or try to use a treble because it'll hold the water better, and you start to do all these little things that I just had it recently, like a couple weeks ago, where I had to fully change everything because it just wasn't doing what I wanted it to do, and it would kind of do it sometimes, but I couldn't put that out, and so it's that not giving up and pushing through barriers. And I like to everybody wants to be comfortable, right? Like your body wants to be comfortable, you want to be comfortable, like your brain wants you to be comfortable and preserve yourself. So it tricks you into all these things, and I kind of always want to see, like I'm comfortable when I see the end of like, and these are the steps I need to get there. That's when I'll start, and that's awful because like you shouldn't do that. You just have to start, like just do it and you'll figure it out. And I would do that for a lot of instances, but just not for this company and not for these lures. And through the last 6 months of really really working on it hard, like it's it has changed a lot. And if I dig to the bottom of that box, they're totally different. And I think kind of like what you said, like I'm a big mindset person, but like my actions are following my mindset now. Like they it's a funny thing. Like I was always like very driven and very like, but I was always very calculated in those decisions and in the
Yeah.
plan. And
Yeah.
like you see that all the time. Like, and you just need to start, I think.
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's like starting anything
Hmm.
is tough, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of the beauty of it. It's like it makes you a tougher individual by just going out and doing something and trying it, and DMing someone on Instagram and seeing if they want to be on your podcast when you have no episodes and no business doing a podcast,
Yeah.
right? Like, and to the same extent, like I think what's interesting, and I don't know, maybe you feel the same way as to the reason why it took you so long, because this podcast, before, like not a lot of people know this, but I was in a hotel room at my friend's wedding recording my voice on GarageBand on my computer and being like, nope, not gonna happen, this sounds stupid, I hate the sound of my own voice, like this is dumb, no one's gonna want to listen, like all the reasons why I shouldn't do it,
Mhm.
right? And then all of a sudden, like a year and a half later, when I felt as though maybe I had maybe something more to
Mhm.
say, probably not, but maybe a little bit more to speak to, or at least think so, um, I decided to do it, and it was just like that weird feeling of, oh shit, is someone gonna like this? Like, or will someone listen? Maybe friends and family. Okay. And then all of a sudden other people start and you're like, huh, that's kind of cool. Right. And to the same extent of you, like a business is such a representation of yourself, but it goes way deeper
Yeah.
than just what's on the surface. Right. So I think, when you made the analogy of like your marathon, um, those are, as much as it is something hard to do, and like same thing with me, like a weightlifting
Mhm.
competition, it's hard to do, but there's calculated steps, like there's a
Yep.
plan to this, whereas what you're doing,
There's no
there is
plan.
no plan, right? There is no plan with this. There is no plan, right? As much as we think there is a plan, really there's just guidelines, and we kind of have to, I think, maneuver our way
Yeah. Yeah.
through it, keep it between the buoys, as Jimmy
Yep.
Buffett would
Yep.
say. So I don't know, I mean, do you think it was, this just a lot of hard work, or was it the right time, the right place, like in the right moment that really brought you to start what it is today? Because it's been a process that goes back to high school
Yep.
for you.
I think it's both. I think it's a lot of hard work and persistence and kind of, and then also like almost like the frustration, I guess, of like you backburnering something for so long and then being like, what am I doing? I just need to do this or not. Like it's like one of those instances where it's like if you're waiting for it's the old like kind of like mindset analogy stuff of like it's never going to be the perfect time to start. You just need to start. Like it's you got to take the first step, and then those things keep moving. Um, so yeah, it's almost like I said, like getting frustrated with yourself with like why are you either you need to do this to get it and it works and it's great and it's awesome and you did it, or like it's a win-win, or you do it to the best of your ability, you're proud of your efforts. It's like weightlifting, like you yeah, you could have done things differently, but that's not how it went. But that was the best you could bring on that day, and it didn't work out. That's awesome too, because now you learned, you know your limit, or you know what you need to work on, or you say, you know what, I'm good. That was where I wanted to get to next. Like I'm going to go on to the next thing. Like whatever is right for you is right. But I think it's just it came to a point where it's like I need to do this and I need to do it for myself. And if it works, it's going to be great, like I said. And if it doesn't work, it's on me. Like it's something I chose or I did or it's in your control basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the analogy that you use there with, weightlifting, because I think it's, you having been a weightlifter in
Yeah.
the past and doing CrossFit, and it's such a perfect, like there's so many parallels for just putting yourself out there,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And all of a sudden you got all these cameras on you, right? And there's like people literally
Yep.
judging you, like not just, in the grand scheme of it, but like, you know, it's one of those things like, do you got what it takes
Yeah.
today? Because that's cool that you did it in the gym. That's nice,
You
but
got to
it
do it on the
doesn't
platform.
matter. You got to do it in the platform, right? And there's this speech that I always listen to. It's called "The Man in the Arena" by
Yeah.
Theodore Roosevelt. And if
I've
you've
I've
ever seen
heard
that before,
pieces of it, I think.
you've heard pieces of it. Yeah,
Mhm.
unbelievable. And it's one of those things where it talks about just this, right? Like that back burner mentality of, you know, if you want to try something, you got to step into
Mhm.
the arena, you know? Like you got to pony up. You got to put
Yeah.
up or shut up, because it's never going to happen if you don't. And you'll never find out if you
Mhm.
don't, right? And I think what's so cool about that quote, and what, this idea of like you pulling that to the front burner and really trying it in a time where shit, you got all the
Yeah.
opportunity in
Yeah.
the world. And it was very similar for me. It's like, all right, I moved back from Hawaii. I currently don't have a job. Why wouldn't I go full
Mhm.
bore on this? Like, what do I got
Yep.
to lose? Right. And, in that quote, they talk about like the people that aren't in the arena, right?
Mhm.
It's, I don't care about your
Yeah.
opinion
You're
because
not
you're not
you're
in
not
the
in it.
arena,
Yeah.
you know? You're not in it. Like whatever you're doing, it could be making, lures. It could be building a huck bucket. It could be doing whatever your
Hmm.
craft is. As long as you have a craft, I consider you a part
Hmm.
of the arena, right? Like I think
Yeah.
everyone can agree with that. Like as long as you're doing something. Um but it's when you're judging it when the critics are outside and they have no
Yeah.
skin in the game. I don't care. I don't care what you have to say because
Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah. Yeah.
matter. And I think that's like I think that's the big fear that people have is like stepping into the arena is the hardest part, but it's the evolution of being in it,
Hmm.
and really getting to the point where it's, you look at your bucket of lures that if you dig to the bottom, like you said, there's probably some really crappy ones in there that you'd never want to show anyone, but you're going to keep them for yourself just because it's like that's the moment of like, wow, this is where it
Hmm.
started. And like, this is how it's going. It's like that Instagram thing that's going around right now. I don't know if you've seen that. Like, this is how it
Oh yeah.
started.
Yeah.
This is where
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
It's like a
The
before and
pointing.
after
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, with that, right? Like, I think is this great throwback, to an earlier simpler time. But as much as your brand is kind of that throwback, that paying homage to, how fishing has
Hmm.
kind of evolved, like where do you see this going for the future?
I think like my plan is just to make it a thing and to just be able to do this and people and get these in people's hands and really show them what they're about and like my view for this has never been like if I wanted to create a brand and they're out there where they're very culty lure brands and they start to and this it actually kind of bummed me out because like there were brands that I followed for a long time and I was like these are the guys I need to emulate, like they're doing really well, I really really respect what they do, like they are full on artists, like take nothing away from them. But when I dug deeper and I did a lot of digging, you find out that like they used to produce. Now a factory produces them for them, which is great because they couldn't possibly produce them all on their own. And they're scaling and scaling and scaling along. And now they're just getting bodies that they paint. They're still artists, like they're still doing it. But I was like, oh, I thought they did the whole thing. Like this kind of like took a little bit of it away from me, you know. So that's kind of like why, like through that process, I learned what was important to me, and that's why I named it what I named the company is because it's like you said, like fighting for the old tradition, but also fighting for what I think it should be, what I think the future should be, and like I have no want or desire to ever like build the company up and sell it. It's not that kind of proposition. It's like if I one day if I couldn't produce possibly enough, I would get more hands. Like I would, you still keep that soul of the company and that soul of what you're producing because I think they do have a little bit more soul than mass produced things. And I think there is that just that vibe to them for lack of a better it's not too woo woo, but it's like I don't know. I don't know how to say that, but it's just a little bit more to it, you know. And I think
Yeah, no, I dig that. I think the word soul is a great terminology for that because that's what it has, and it reaches far beyond that. Like, the lure itself, but then like you interacting with that lure and the fish and the
yeah,
environment and the whole ecosystem around you as you're casting that lure and experiencing that fish. Like, there's a lot of
yeah,
soul in that. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, it might be like a little existential, and you're like, oh, woo, like, right, but I think that's what
yeah.
it is.
Yeah, it's all the pieces that come together to make that experience. And I think there's just more there with something that's made like this. And then like the custom rod builder too, like that, like you put all those things together and it's more of an experience than something that you bought off the shelf or it's you have more vested in it and it's more about like the producer, like I want to go out and meet people and hand these things out and just let me know what you think, like kind of like that kind of stuff is like super cool to me to build the relationships and build it up and kind of do for this little company, kind of what I did for successful companies and companies that are further along, and really like shore them up and invest back into them. And like as long as there's food on the table, I'm going to keep pushing this thing as hard as I can. And it's that's the goal, is to kind of make it, you know, a regional thing, and maybe beyond that, and still keep that small producer kind of like, if 10 years from now we talk again, man, and it's like we're in a warehouse and there's 3 people and I have a paint guy, and that's like, that's awesome, but the process is still the same. There might not be the same set of hands, but it's still hands. It's still very analog kind of, like, it's like custom woodworking. Like, we have a lot of friends who are really super talented building super cool stuff, and a lot of them do like the like epoxy work too, and seeing how that comes together, and you just see all these hand built things, and you're like, wow, like people really dig that stuff. Like, it's there's so much more to that than like, oh, I got this IKEA table, like, you like it, you know? It's like, no, I got this rad enamel, super modern, crazy thing, and they're like, who built that? And it's like, oh, Bob down the street. You know, it's like, that's a really cool thing, and it's a little bit of wizardry and behind the curtain stuff, but I don't know. I think it's like I said before. I think it's just a cool thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something. I think you're 100% right. I mean, that traditional type, analog style of building something, there's something to be said with that, working with your hands and crafting something from
Yeah.
nothing, right? And using a material that's been used
Hmm.
for forever, and it's no, so I really like what you're doing, and I'm just excited to have that conversation. However long in the future, when you do have a warehouse and with 3 guys, one paying for it, one busting them out. But yeah. So where can people learn more about Fight Lurco, and how can they get involved and eventually buy a lure, because they're coming
Yeah.
out
My
soon, right?
my the date I threw out was April 1st, but I'm halfway through the process of cutting the first run and getting them going. But I was testing different epoxies, and I really wanted it to be right. So that's going to take a couple of days, and so I'm probably like the second week in April I'll start shipping them. But I'm going to do I'll have a pre-order up on April 1st for everybody. Um, but yeah, it's Fight Lure Co on Instagram, and it's fightlures.com is the website. And there's a little bit of like what we talked about, like the story. I just wrote the about page, and I have some hats and shirts too, and stuff like that. But I'll be doing giveaways for the launch, or like, different stuff, so everybody can just get online and check it out.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks, Dave, for being on the show. And yeah, I'm stoked to be able to, cast a line
Absolutely.
with you one of these days, and make it down to Long Island. But again, be able to see where Fight Lair is going, and finally
Very
see the
cool.
launch coming soon.
Thanks a
So
million, Zach.
thanks for
Appreciate
coming
it.
on.